The morning mist hung over Adelaide Cottage like a secret waiting to be told. Camilla stepped out of the black Range Rover, her heels clicking against the wet cobblestones with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. Not here. Not at a place that had become as familiar to her as her own reflection. The cottage stood before her, its ivy-covered walls holding decades of royal memories. This wasn't just any property. This was where William and Catherine had chosen to raise their children, away from the suffocating protocol of palace life. It was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place where the next generation of royals could simply be children. But today felt different. Camilla adjusted her pearl necklace, a nervous habit she had developed over the years of navigating the treacherous waters of royal politics. The gardens around Adelaide Cottage were immaculate as always, with roses blooming in perfect rows and hedges trimmed to mathematical precision. Everything looked exactly as it should, yet something in the air whispered of change. She had come here for what should have been a routine visit. Charles had asked her to deliver some documents to William personally. Official papers that required the Prince of Wales's immediate attention. It was the kind of task that usually took 15 minutes at most. Walk in, exchange pleasantries with Catherine if she was around, hand over the papers to William, perhaps steal a quick moment with the grandchildren if they were home from school. Simple. Routine. Expected. As she approached the main entrance, Camilla noticed the guard standing more rigidly than usual. Thomas Mitchell had been stationed at Adelaide Cottage for 3 years. She knew him by name, had exchanged countless polite greetings with him. He was a tall man in his 40s, with graying temples and eyes that had seen enough royal drama to fill several lifetimes. Usually, he would nod respectfully and step aside, sometimes even offering a comment about the weather or asking about her weekend plans. But, today, Thomas remained firmly planted in front of the door. "Good morning, Thomas," Camilla said, her voice carrying the warm authority she had perfected over years of royal duties. "Lovely day, isn't it? Though I do hope this mist clears up before the children get home from school." Thomas straightened even more, if that were possible. His hand moved slightly toward the radio clipped to his uniform. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I'm afraid I need to see your authorization for today's visit." Camilla paused mid-step. Authorization? She had been coming to Adelaide Cottage regularly for months. Sometimes with Charles, sometimes alone. Never once had anyone asked for authorization. The request struck her as odd, like being asked for identification at her own front door. "Authorization," she repeated, a slight laugh escaping despite her confusion. "Thomas, I think there might be some misunderstanding. I'm here to see William. Charles asked me to deliver some papers." The guard's expression remained unchanged. Professional. Distant. It was as if overnight, years of casual familiarity had been erased. "I understand, Your Majesty. However, I have specific instructions regarding access to the cottage today. I need to see written authorization for your visit." Written authorization. The words hung in the air between them like an accusation. Camilla felt her cheeks flush, though she couldn't quite identify whether it was from embarrassment, confusion, or the first stirrings of anger. In all her years as part of the royal family, she had never been asked to produce papers to visit family members. Even during the most formal occasions, her presence was simply expected and accepted. "I don't have written authorization, Thomas," she said slowly, as if explaining something to a child. "I don't need written authorization. I'm here on behalf of the king. Surely you can make an exception?" But Thomas shook his head, and, for the first time, Camilla saw something that might have been sympathy flicker across his features. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I really am. But my orders were very specific. No exceptions. No one enters without proper authorization, regardless of their position." The emphasis on regardless of their position hit like a physical blow. Camilla took a step back, genuinely shocked. She looked past Thomas toward the cottage windows, half expecting to see William or Catherine appear, perhaps laughing about some elaborate practical joke. But the windows remained empty, their lace curtains drawn against the morning light. Your orders, Camilla repeated carefully. From whom? Thomas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. From the Prince of Wales's office, Your Majesty. The instructions were very clear. This area is restricted today. Wales family only. Wales family only. The words echoed in Camilla's mind like a gong. She was married to the King of England. She was Queen Consort. She had stood beside Charles through scandals and celebrations, through public criticism and private grief. She had earned her place in this family through decades of service and dedication. But she was not Wales family. The realization hit her with stunning clarity. William was the Prince of Wales. Catherine was the Princess of Wales. Their children were Wales. Charles, despite being king, had been Prince of Wales for decades before ascending to the throne. The Wales name carried a weight and history that transcended even royal titles. And Camilla, for all her position and power, would always be Parker Bowles by birth, Cornwall by marriage to Charles when he was Duke of Cornwall, and now Queen Consort by his coronation. But never Wales. Never part of that particular inner circle that seemed to matter more than crowns or titles. I see, she said quietly, though she was beginning to understand that she saw very little at all. Thomas shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing the awkwardness of the situation but bound by his orders. Perhaps you could contact the Prince of Wales's office directly, Your Majesty? I'm sure they could arrange proper authorization for a future visit. A future visit. As if she were some distant relative requesting an audience rather than the king's wife delivering important documents. The humiliation was subtle but complete. She had been reduced to the same status as any other visitor who might show up unannounced and unwelcome. Camilla looked again at the cottage, its windows still blank and unwelcoming. She wondered if William and Catherine were inside, watching this scene unfold. She wondered if they had orchestrated it, or if they were as surprised by these new restrictions as she was. Most of all, she wondered what had changed overnight to make her presence suddenly unwelcome in a place where she had previously been treated as family. The documents in her handbag suddenly felt heavier. Whatever was in those papers, whatever urgent matter required William's immediate attention, would have to wait. She had become an outsider to her own family's business, blocked by protocol that seemed designed specifically to exclude her. Of course, she said finally, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. I'll contact the office directly. Thank you for doing your job so thoroughly, Thomas. The guard nodded, relief evident in his posture. Thank you for understanding, Your Majesty. I do hope you have a pleasant rest of your morning. As Camilla walked back toward her car, she could feel Thomas's eyes following her. The morning mist seemed thicker now, wrapping around her like a shroud. The roses in the garden, which had looked so perfect moments before, now seemed artificial somehow, like props in a play where everyone knew their lines except her. She reached her car and paused with her hand on the door handle. Behind her, Adelaide Cottage stood silent and secure, protected by new rules she didn't understand and restrictions that seemed aimed directly at her. The documents in her bag remained undelivered, her mission failed not by any dramatic confrontation but by the quiet, devastating power of bureaucracy. For the first time since marrying Charles, Camilla felt truly alone. Not just physically isolated on this misty morning, but emotionally cut off from the family she had worked so hard to join. The title of Queen Consort, which had seemed like the culmination of her long journey to acceptance, suddenly felt hollow. Titles were just words. Family was something else entirely. And, apparently, she wasn't family enough. The drive back to Clarence's house would give her time to think, to process what had just happened and decide how to respond. But, right now, sitting in her car outside Adelaide Cottage with undelivered documents and unanswered questions, Camilla could only wonder when everything had started to change, and whether she had been too comfortable, too confident in her position to notice the ground shifting beneath her feet. The mist continued to swirl around the cottage, keeping its secrets locked away behind ivy-covered walls and newly enforced boundaries. Whatever was happening within the Wales family, Camilla was no longer invited to witness it firsthand. She had been politely, professionally, but unmistakably shut out. And the most unsettling part was that she had no idea why the phone call came at exactly 2:47 p.m. Camilla knew the precise time because she had been staring at the antique clock on her desk at Clarence's house for the better part of an hour, watching its hands move with agonizing slowness while she wrestled with how to handle the morning's humiliation. "Your Majesty," came the crisp voice of Sarah Henderson, William's private secretary. "I understand there was some confusion at Adelaide Cottage this morning. The Prince of Wales would like to arrange a meeting to discuss the matter." Confusion. As if being barred from entering a family home by armed security was simply a scheduling mix-up. Camilla set down her teacup with deliberate care, buying herself a moment to choose her words wisely. "That would be helpful, Sarah. When would be convenient for William? He suggests this afternoon, if possible. Perhaps we could meet at Kensington Palace? The Prince feels it would be more appropriate to discuss this matter in a formal setting." More appropriate than what? Than acknowledging that his stepmother had been turned away like an unwelcome salesperson? Camilla felt her jaw tighten but kept her voice level. "Of course. Shall we say 4 o'clock? Perfect. The Prince will see you in his private office." The line went dead, leaving Camilla staring at the phone with growing unease. In all the years since William's marriage to Catherine, their relationship had been cordial if not warm. They respected each other's positions, maintained pleasant conversations at family gatherings, and generally avoided the kind of drama that had plagued the royal family in previous decades. But there had always been an invisible line. Camilla understood that she would never replace Diana in William's heart, never be the grandmother figure to his children that Diana might have been. She had accepted that role gracefully, content to be a supportive presence on the periphery of their lives rather than attempting to claim a centrality she had never been offered. Now, it seemed, even that peripheral role was being questioned. The drive to Kensington Palace took 23 minutes through London traffic that seemed unusually heavy for a Tuesday afternoon. Camilla spent the journey reviewing every interaction she had had with William and Catherine over the past few months, searching for clues about what might have prompted this sudden change in access. Had she overstepped somehow? Said something inappropriate? Failed to observe some protocol she wasn't aware of? The more she thought about it, the more frustrated she became. If there was a problem, why hadn't anyone simply talked to her about it directly? Why resort to security barriers and formal meetings? Kensington Palace loomed ahead, its red brick facade familiar yet somehow forbidding in the grey afternoon light. Camilla had been here countless times for official functions, family celebrations, and casual visits. Today felt different. Today felt like she was approaching a tribunal rather than a family discussion. The security at Kensington Palace recognized her immediately and waved her through without incident. No requests for authorization here, no questioning of her right to enter. The contrast with that morning's experience at Adelaide Cottage was stark and telling. Whatever restrictions had been put in place seemed specifically targeted at the Wales family's private residence. William's private office occupied a corner of the palace with tall windows overlooking the perfectly manicured gardens. It was a room that managed to be both grand and intimate, filled with personal photographs alongside the formal portraits required by his position. Camilla had been here before, but always for pleasant occasions. Today, the familiar space felt charged with tension. William stood as she entered, offering a formal bow that seemed more ceremonial than necessary. At 31, he had grown into his role as heir to the throne with a seriousness that sometimes made him seem older than his years. Today, that seriousness was particularly pronounced. "Camilla, thank you for coming so quickly. Please, sit down." She chose the chair across from his desk, noting that he remained standing for several moments longer than was comfortable. When he finally sat, his posture was rigid, his hands clasped tightly on the desk surface. "I understand there was an incident at Adelaide Cottage this morning," he began without preamble. "I want to apologize for any embarrassment you may have experienced. That wasn't the intention." "What was the intention, William?" Camilla asked directly. She had learned over the years that dancing around sensitive topics within the royal family usually made them worse, not better. William paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Catherine and I have decided that we need more privacy for our family. More control over who has access to our children and our home. I'm sure you can understand that. Of course I can understand that. What I don't understand is why I wasn't informed of this decision beforehand. Or why the security guards seemed to have instructions that specifically excluded me. It's not specifically about you, William said, though his tone suggested otherwise. We've implemented new protocols for everyone. Family visits now require advance coordination through my office. Everyone? Camilla pressed. So if your father wanted to visit spontaneously, he would also be turned away by security? The silence that followed was answer enough. They both knew that Charles, as king and, as William's father, would never be subject to such restrictions. The protocols William was describing seemed designed to create barriers for some family members while maintaining easy access for others. The truth is, William continued after a long pause, Catherine and I feel that we need more boundaries. More space to raise our children as we see fit, without outside influences. Outside influences. The phrase hung in the air like an accusation. Camilla felt something cold settle in her stomach as she began to understand the full scope of what was happening. Am I an outside influence, William? Another pause. Another careful consideration of words that would shape the future of their relationship. You're my father's wife, he said finally. And I respect that relationship. But, Catherine and I have our own vision for how we want to raise our family, and we need the freedom to do that without feeling obligated to include everyone in every aspect of our lives. The diplomatic language couldn't disguise the underlying message. Camilla was being told, in the most polite terms possible, that her presence in the lives of William's children was no longer welcome. Not forbidden entirely, but certainly not encouraged or facilitated. I see, Camilla said quietly. And, Charles? How does he feel about these new arrangements? For the first time, William's composure cracked slightly. His hands shifted on the desk, and he avoided her direct gaze. Papa and I discussed it. He understands our position. He understands, or he agrees? He understands that Catherine and I have the right to make decisions about our own family. Which wasn't the same thing at all, Camilla realized. Charles might understand his son's position without necessarily agreeing with it. As king, he was probably trying to balance his roles as father, husband, and monarch without taking sides in what was becoming an increasingly complex family dynamic. What about the children? Camilla asked. George, Charlotte, and Louis have always seemed comfortable with me. Are you concerned about my influence on them specifically? William's expression softened slightly at the mention of his children, but his resolve didn't waver. The children are young. They adapt easily to changes in routine. We feel it's better to establish clear boundaries now, while they're still forming their understanding of family relationships. Translation: It was easier to exclude Camilla now than to deal with complicated explanations later about why Grandpa's wife wasn't really part of their inner family circle. Camilla felt a wave of sadness wash over her. She thought about the times she had read stories to Charlotte, helped George with a difficult puzzle, or simply sat quietly with Louis while he played with his toys. Those moments had felt genuine, natural, unforced. Apparently, they had also been unwelcome. I want you to know, she said carefully, that I never intended to overstep or interfere. If there were specific concerns about my interactions with the children, I wish you had spoken to me directly. It's not about specific incidents, William replied. It's about establishing principles for how we want to live our lives going forward. Catherine and I discussed this extensively, and we feel this is the right decision for our family. Catherine and I. Not we as a extended family or we with input from other family members. The decision had been made in isolation, presented as a fait accompli rather than something open to discussion or compromise. What does this mean practically? Camilla asked. Am I to understand that all future contact needs to be arranged through your office? That spontaneous visits are no longer possible? For now, yes. We're establishing new routines, and we need consistency while the children adjust. For now. The phrase offered hope for future changes while making clear that the current restrictions were non-negotiable.
Camilla stood slowly, her legs feeling unsteady after the emotional weight of the conversation.
Everything she had worked to build with William's family over the years was being systematically dismantled, packaged in diplomatic language and presented as a reasonable accommodation. "I respect your decision, William," she said, though the words tasted bitter. "I hope you'll remember that I've always tried to support you and Catherine in whatever way I could. If that support is no longer wanted or needed, I'll step back accordingly." William stood as well, and, for a moment, his formal demeanor cracked enough to reveal something that might have been regret. "It's not that your support isn't appreciated, Camilla. It's just that Catherine and I need to find our own way as parents. I hope you can understand that." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak further. The meeting was clearly over, the new rules established and communicated. All that remained was the careful navigation of a relationship that had fundamentally changed in the space of a single afternoon. As she walked back through the familiar corridors of Kensington Palace, Camilla reflected on how quickly and quietly everything had shifted. No dramatic confrontations, no shouting matches or thrown accusations. Just the steady, inexorable establishment of new boundaries that left her on the outside of a family she had thought she belonged to. The afternoon light was fading as she stepped outside, and the London traffic seemed even heavier than before. During the drive back to Clarence's house, she wondered how she would explain this to Charles, how she would navigate family gatherings going forward, and how she would adjust to a role that had suddenly become much smaller and more peripheral than she had ever imagined. Most of all, she wondered if this was just the beginning of a larger reorganization of royal family dynamics, or if she had somehow become a specific target of William and Catherine's desire for independence. Either way, the message was clear: her place in their lives would be strictly limited going forward. The documents that had started this whole episode still sat undelivered in her handbag, a tangible reminder of how quickly and completely she had been shut out of family business that once would have included her as a matter of course. As Clarence's house came into view, Camilla braced herself for what would likely be a very difficult conversation with her husband about how their family was evolving in ways none of them had anticipated. Charles was in his study when Camilla returned to Clarence's house, surrounded by the familiar chaos of his work. Papers covered every available surface, 3 different fountain pens lay scattered across his desk, and the scent of his preferred Earl Grey tea lingered in the air. He looked up as she entered, and she could see immediately that he already knew something was wrong. "How did the meeting go?" he asked quietly, setting aside the document he had been reading. Camilla settled into the worn leather chair across from his desk, the same chair where she had sat through countless conversations over the years. Some had been joyful, others difficult, but none quite like this one. "William and Catherine have decided they need more privacy," she began, trying to keep her voice neutral. "They've implemented new security protocols for Adelaide Cottage. All family visits now require advance authorization." Charles removed his reading glasses and rubbed his eyes, a gesture she recognized as his way of buying time when dealing with complicated family matters. "All family visits?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Apparently not all. The protocols seem designed to limit access for certain family members while preserving it for others." "I see." Charles was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the gardens beyond. "And you feel these protocols are directed specifically at you?" The security guard this morning referred to the cottage as a Wales-only area. William explained that they want to raise their children without outside influences. "I believe the implications are clear enough." Charles stood abruptly and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back in the posture he adopted when wrestling with particularly thorny problems. As king, he was the head of the family. As a father, he wanted to support his son's autonomy. As a husband, he was watching his wife be systematically excluded from family relationships she had worked years to build. "I knew William was concerned about privacy," he said finally. "The media attention on the children has been intense lately, and he and Catherine are feeling the pressure. But I didn't realize he was considering such dramatic changes to family access." "Did you know about the new security protocols?" Another pause. Another careful consideration of words that would navigate between loyalty to his son and loyalty to his wife. William mentioned that he was reviewing security arrangements. He didn't specify what changes he was considering. Which meant Charles had known something was coming but hadn't warned her, perhaps hoping the changes would be less dramatic or less targeted than they had turned out to be.
What does this mean for us going forward? Camilla asked. For our family?
I don't know, Charles admitted, turning back to face her. William is entitled to make decisions about his own household, about how he raises his children. But these decisions have broader implications for family unity, for the relationships between different branches of the family.
Do you think Catherine is driving this?
It was a dangerous question, one that touched on undercurrents that had existed for years but were rarely discussed openly.
Catherine had always been polite to Camilla, had never shown any outward signs of hostility or resentment.
But politeness was not the same as warmth, and Camilla had long suspected that Catherine's acceptance of her was more dutiful than genuine. I think, Charles said carefully, that William and Catherine are making decisions as a unit.
They're protecting what they see as their family's best interests. Whether that assessment is accurate or fair is another question entirely. And what about your assessment? Do you think I'd been overstepping somehow? Have I done something to warrant this kind of exclusion?
Charles returned to his chair and reached across the desk to take her hand. His touch was warm and reassuring, a reminder of the bond that had sustained them through years of public scrutiny and private challenges. You have been nothing but supportive and respectful in your interactions with William's family, he said firmly. If there are concerns about boundaries or influence, they should have been addressed through direct conversation, not through security protocols and formal restrictions.
But you're not going to intervene. It wasn't really a question.
Camilla knew Charles well enough to understand that he would avoid taking sides in family conflicts whenever possible, preferring to let relationships evolve naturally rather than forcing resolutions that might create more problems than they solved.
I'm going to talk to William, he said.
Not to overturn his decisions, but to understand his reasoning and perhaps find ways to accommodate everyone's needs without creating permanent divisions.
And if he refuses to modify his position?
Then, we'll adapt to the new reality and find ways to maintain family relationships within whatever parameters William and Catherine establish. The conversation continued for another hour, touching on practical matters like future family gatherings, holiday arrangements, and the complex logistics of royal scheduling. But underneath the practical discussions lay deeper questions about loyalty, acceptance, and the price of belonging to a family where personal relationships were always complicated by public roles and institutional pressures. That evening, Camilla found herself in the unusual position of having nothing scheduled and nowhere she was expected to be. Her calendar, typically packed with engagements, meetings, and social obligations, had a rare empty space. She used the time to walk through the gardens behind Clarence's house, thinking about how quickly life could change and how little control anyone really had over the reactions and decisions of other people. The call from her sister Annabelle came just as she was considering an early bedtime. I heard through the family grapevine that you had an interesting day, Annabelle said without preamble.
Want to talk about it? Camilla almost smiled despite everything. Trust Annabelle to cut straight to the heart of matters without bothering with polite preliminaries. I'm not sure how much there is to talk about. William and Catherine want more privacy for their family. I've been asked to respect that desire. By being banned from their home? By coordinating visits through official channels rather than dropping by spontaneously. Which amounts to the same thing, doesn't it? When was the last time anyone in this family coordinated anything through official channels unless they were trying to avoid it entirely? Annabelle had a point.
The royal family, for all its formal structures, operated on relationships and informal understandings when it came to personal interactions. Requiring official coordination was effectively the same as discouraging contact altogether. The children are young, Camilla said, repeating William's explanation. William and Catherine want to establish clear boundaries while the children are still forming their understanding of family relationships.
And what understanding are they forming? That family is only the people who share the same last name? That marriage doesn't create real bonds, only temporary alliances?
These were uncomfortable questions, ones that went to the heart of Camilla's insecurities about her place in the royal family. She had married Charles relatively late in life, after his first marriage had ended and his children were already partially grown. She had never had the opportunity to be a traditional stepmother, to be involved in the daily routines and small moments that create genuine familial bonds. Instead, she had been a peripheral figure, welcomed at formal occasions but kept at arm's length from the intimate aspects of family life. She had accepted this role, had even been grateful for the level of acceptance she had achieved. Now, even that limited role was being further restricted. Perhaps they're forming the understanding that family relationships need to be earned and maintained, not simply assumed, Camilla said quietly.
And what exactly do you need to do to earn your place in this family that you haven't already done?
You've supported Charles through everything. You've been gracious and respectful to his children. You've never tried to replace their mother or claim authority you weren't given.
What more do they want from you?
It was a question Camilla couldn't answer, partly because she wasn't sure William and Catherine wanted anything from her at all. Their message seemed to be that her presence was unnecessary rather than insufficient, that they could raise their children and manage their family relationships perfectly well without any input or involvement from her.
Maybe that's the problem, she said finally.
Maybe I've been too passive, too accepting of a peripheral role. Maybe they see that as weakness rather than respect.
Or maybe they're just protecting their territory and you're an easy target because you don't have any independent claim to those children.
Annabelle's bluntness was both painful and clarifying.
As Charles's wife, Camilla had a role in the royal family.
But, as the children's step-grandmother, her relationship was entirely dependent on the goodwill of their parents. If William and Catherine decided that relationship wasn't valuable or necessary, there was no institutional protection, no formal role that guaranteed her continued involvement.
What are you going to do? Annabelle asked. What can I do?
I'll respect their wishes and hope that time and changing circumstances might create opportunities for different kinds of relationships in the future.
That's very diplomatic of you.
I'm married to the king.
Diplomacy is a survival skill.
After hanging up, Camilla realized that her conversation with Annabelle had helped clarify something important.
This wasn't really about specific incidents or boundary violations.
It was about power and control, about who got to make decisions about family relationships and who had to accept those decisions without question. William and Catherine were exercising their power as parents to control access to their children and their home. As the monarch's son and daughter-in-law, they had the institutional authority to make those decisions stick, regardless of how other family members felt about them. Camilla, for all her titles and position, was ultimately powerless in this dynamic. She could express her feelings, she could seek understanding, she could hope for future changes. But she could not force her way into relationships where she was not wanted, and she could not override parental decisions about what was best for their children.
The realization was both liberating and devastating.
Liberating because it meant she could stop wondering what she had done wrong or what she could do differently. Devastating because it meant accepting that some relationships would always be beyond her control, no matter how much she valued them or how hard she worked to maintain them. As she prepared for bed that night, Camilla reflected on how much her life had changed in a single day. This morning, she had been a queen consort with easy access to all members of her extended family. Tonight, she was still a queen consort, but one whose family relationships had been redefined without her input or consent. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new adaptations. She would need to find ways to maintain dignity and grace while accepting a diminished role in the lives of people she cared about. She would need to support Charles as he navigated between his roles as father and husband. Most importantly, she would need to redefine her own sense of purpose and belonging in a family structure that had suddenly become much more complicated. The documents that had started this whole episode still sat undelivered, a reminder that sometimes the most significant changes begin with the smallest, most mundane circumstances. A routine visit that became impossible. A simple delivery that became a diplomatic incident. A family relationship that transformed overnight from comfortable familiarity to formal distance. Change, Camilla realized, often arrived not with drama and confrontation, but with quiet redirections and polite exclusions that were impossible to challenge directly but devastating in their cumulative effect. Today had been such a day, and she suspected it was only the beginning of a much larger transformation in how the royal family would operate going forward. 3 weeks passed before the full implications of the Adelaide Cottage incident became clear. The first family gathering since the new protocols had been established was Princess Charlotte's birthday celebration at Sandringham. What should have been a joyful family occasion instead became a careful dance of new boundaries and unspoken tensions. Camilla arrived with Charles, as expected. They brought gifts, offered congratulations, and participated in the usual rituals of a royal family birthday. But, underneath the pleasant surface, everything had changed. Where once she might have helped serve cake or joined in organizing party games, Camilla found herself maintaining a polite distance, uncertain of what involvement would be welcomed and unwilling to risk another public rejection. Catherine was gracious but formal, thanking Camilla for the beautiful doll she had chosen for Charlotte but not inviting further interaction. William maintained his usual respectful demeanor but seemed to monitor every conversation Camilla had with the children, ready to redirect their attention if the interactions became too engaging or lasted too long. Most telling was Charlotte's reaction. The little girl, usually chatty and affectionate with all family members, seemed confused by the new dynamics. She approached Camilla several times, only to be gently but firmly guided away by her parents toward other activities or other relatives. The child's bewildered expressions suggested she didn't understand why her relationship with her step-grandmother had suddenly become limited and supervised.
"Grandmama," Charlotte said at one point, using the name all the grandchildren had adopted for Camilla, "can you come read me a story later?" Before Camilla could respond, Catherine intervened smoothly.
"Charlotte, darling, we need to cut your cake now.
Perhaps Grandpapa Charles would like to help you with that instead." The redirection was skillful and kind, but its message was unmistakable.
Camilla's role in the children's lives was being actively minimized, not through harsh restrictions but through constant, gentle management that made genuine connection impossible. After the party, during the drive back to London, Charles was unusually quiet. Finally, he spoke without taking his eyes off the road ahead.
"That was more difficult than I expected."
"The children don't understand the new rules," Camilla replied. "They're confused about why their relationships with me have suddenly become so limited."
William and Catherine are trying to establish boundaries without creating obvious conflict. They think they're being considerate by managing the transition gradually. And, what do you think?
Charles was quiet for several miles before answering.
"I think they're creating the very problems they're trying to avoid." The children sense the tension even if they don't understand its source. And the rest of the family is beginning to notice the changed dynamics. He was right.
During the birthday celebration, Camilla had observed other family members watching the interactions with William's family, clearly recognizing that something had shifted but uncertain about what or why. The careful management of her access to the children had been subtle but not invisible. "Have you spoken to William since our meeting at Kensington Palace?" she asked.
"Several times.
He insists that the new arrangements are temporary, that once the children adjust to the changes, there may be opportunities to relax some of the restrictions."
"Do you believe that?" "I want to believe it. But I'm beginning to think this is about more than just privacy and boundary setting."
"I think William and Catherine are fundamentally reconsidering what they want their family structure to look like, and that reconsideration may not include expanded roles for anyone outside their immediate unit." The conversation was interrupted by a call from Charles's private secretary. There had been a scheduling conflict for an upcoming state dinner, and several details needed immediate attention. As Charles dealt with the logistical complexities of royal protocol, Camilla found herself thinking about how much easier it was to manage formal relationships than personal ones. At state dinners, everyone knew their role. Seating arrangements were determined by established precedents, conversations followed predictable patterns, and any tensions were carefully managed through diplomatic protocol. Family relationships, by contrast, operated in a much more fluid and unpredictable space where hurt feelings and misunderstandings could fester for years without resolution.
The irony was not lost on her.
As Queen Consort, she could host foreign dignitaries, represent Britain at international events, and navigate complex political relationships with skill and confidence. But, as a step-grandmother, she was powerless to maintain relationships with children she genuinely cared about if their parents decided those relationships were unwelcome. A week after Charlotte's birthday, Camilla received an unexpected invitation. Princess Anne had called to invite her to lunch, suggesting they meet at a quiet restaurant away from royal residences and family properties. The invitation was unusual enough to make Camilla curious about Anne's motivations. They met at a small French restaurant in Chelsea that Anne favored for personal meals. The setting was intimate and private, unlikely to attract media attention or unwanted observers. Anne arrived precisely on time, as always, and got straight to the point after they had ordered. "I wanted to talk to you about what happened at Adelaide Cottage," she said without preamble. "And about the changes in family dynamics that seem to be developing." Camilla was careful in her response. Anne had always been direct and pragmatic, but family loyalty ran deep in the royal family, and taking sides in internal conflicts was dangerous territory. "I'm trying to respect William and Catherine's desire for more privacy," she said diplomatically. "Privacy is one thing. Exclusion is another. And what I observed at Charlotte's birthday looked more like exclusion than privacy protection." Anne's assessment was both accurate and concerning. If other family members were beginning to see the new arrangements as deliberate exclusion rather than reasonable boundary setting, the situation was more serious than Camilla had realized. The children were confused, and continued. "Charlotte kept looking around for you during the party, and, when she finally found you, she couldn't understand why she wasn't allowed to spend time with you the way she always has. That's not healthy for anyone. What do you think is really happening?" And paused to consider her words, a rare moment of diplomatic caution from someone usually known for blunt honesty. "I think Catherine has never been entirely comfortable with the complex family dynamics she married into. She came from a relatively simple family structure, and the royal family's various relationships and historical complications have always been challenging for her to navigate." "And you think she's trying to simplify things?" "I think she's trying to create a family structure that makes sense to her, one where the lines of authority and belonging are clear and uncomplicated. Unfortunately, that means some relationships that were previously valued may be seen as unnecessary complications." It was a perceptive analysis that explained much about what Camilla had been experiencing. Catherine had indeed come from a more straightforward family background, where relationships were defined by blood and marriage in traditional ways. The royal family's more complex web of relationships, historical tensions, and blended family dynamics might well seem unnecessarily complicated to someone seeking clarity and control. "What do you think I should do?" "For now, nothing dramatic. Don't force confrontations or demand explanations. But also don't disappear entirely. Continue to be available for the relationships that are welcome, and let time reveal whether the current restrictions are truly temporary or represent a permanent change. And if they're permanent, then you'll adapt, as you always have. But you shouldn't have to pretend that exclusion doesn't hurt, or that these changes don't have real consequences for family unity." The lunch continued for another hour, touching on various family matters and royal obligations. But, underneath the pleasant conversation, both women understood that they were discussing something larger than individual hurt feelings or personal slights. They were witnessing a fundamental shift in how the next generation of royals intended to manage family relationships, and the implications extended far beyond Camilla's personal situation. After lunch, Camilla walked through Chelsea for a while, thinking about Anne's observations and advice. The afternoon was crisp and clear, with the kind of autumn light that made London look particularly beautiful. Street vendors were selling seasonal flowers, and the cafes were full of people enjoying the pleasant weather. It was the kind of afternoon when, in the past, she might have called Catherine to suggest a spontaneous shopping trip or invited the children for an impromptu visit to a museum. Those casual connections, she realized, had been more valuable than she had understood at the time. They were the foundation of genuine relationships, the small moments that created trust and affection over time. Now, every interaction would need to be planned, approved, and supervised. The spontaneity that had made her relationships with William's family feel natural and easy was gone, replaced by formal arrangements that would inevitably feel artificial and constrained. That evening, Charles returned from a series of meetings looking tired and frustrated. He poured himself a whiskey, unusual for him except during particularly stressful periods.
Difficult day? Camilla asked. William called this afternoon.
He wanted to discuss the arrangements for the Christmas holidays at Sandringham. Camilla felt her heart sink. Christmas had always been her favorite time with the extended family, when formal protocols relaxed somewhat and genuine warmth could emerge. The idea that even holiday celebrations might now be subject to new restrictions was deeply depressing.
What did he say?
He suggested that this year might be a good time to establish new traditions, ones that better reflect how the family is evolving.
He's concerned that large gatherings with multiple generations might be overwhelming for the children. Overwhelming how? Too many competing relationships, too many different expectations and influences. He thinks smaller, more focused celebrations would be better for everyone.
Translation: William and Catherine wanted Christmas celebrations that didn't require them to manage complex family dynamics or navigate relationships they found difficult or unwelcome.
I see. And what did you tell him?
I told him that family traditions exist for good reasons, and that Christmas has always been a time when family members make special efforts to be together despite their differences or complications. I suggested that perhaps we could find ways to honor both tradition and their desire for a more manageable celebration.
And his response?
He said he'd discuss it with Catherine and get back to me. They both understood what that meant. The decision had probably already been made, and the discussion with Catherine would simply confirm whatever arrangements they had already planned. As they sat together in the comfortable silence of their shared living space, Camilla realized that she was grieving. Not for any dramatic loss or shocking betrayal, but for the slow erosion of relationships and possibilities she had valued more than she had understood. The future she had envisioned, one where she might play a meaningful role in the lives of Charles's grandchildren, was disappearing piece by piece, replaced by formal arrangements and careful boundaries that left little room for genuine connection. The most painful part was the recognition that this process was probably irreversible. Once family relationships were restructured around exclusion rather than inclusion, once trust was replaced by supervision and spontaneity by scheduling, it became very difficult to return to the easier, more natural dynamics that had existed before. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new adaptations. But tonight, in the quiet of Clarence's house, Camilla allowed herself to feel the full weight of what was being lost, and to acknowledge that some changes, however diplomatically presented, represented genuine and lasting damage to the fabric of family life. 6 months had passed since that misty morning at Adelaide Cottage, and the royal family's Christmas gathering at Sandringham would be the first major test of how the new family dynamics would work in practice. As Camilla packed for what had once been her favorite holiday celebration, she found herself approaching the trip with a mixture of resignation and carefully managed expectations. The guest list itself told the story of how things had changed. In previous years, Christmas at Sandringham had included multiple generations, extended family members, and close friends, creating a warm and chaotic atmosphere that felt more like a genuine family celebration than a royal obligation. This year, the gathering was notably smaller, more selective, and more carefully organized. William, Catherine, and their children would be there, of course. Charles and Camilla would attend, as expected. But several family members who had traditionally joined the Christmas celebration had been diplomatically redirected to other arrangements. The message was subtle but clear: Christmas would be more intimate this year, with fewer complications and competing relationships to manage. The journey to Sandringham took place in unusual silence. Charles, normally chatty during family trips, seemed lost in his own thoughts about how to navigate the holiday without creating the kind of tensions that might spoil the celebration for everyone, especially the children. Camilla found herself mentally rehearsing conversations and interactions, trying to anticipate potential awkward moments and plan responses that would maintain dignity while respecting the new boundaries. The first indication that this Christmas would be different came during the traditional Christmas Eve gift exchange. In previous years, Camilla had participated fully in the family tradition of opening gifts together, had exchanged playful banter with the children, and had been included in the various family rituals that made the holiday special. This year, she found herself more observer than participant. Her gifts to the children were accepted politely but without the enthusiasm and genuine excitement she had grown accustomed to. More telling, the children seemed uncertain about how to interact with her, glancing frequently at their parents as if seeking guidance about appropriate levels of engagement. Prince George, now old enough to understand complex social dynamics, was particularly careful in his interactions with Camilla. Where once he might have asked her to help him set up a new toy or shown her his latest drawings with unselfconscious enthusiasm, he now maintained a polite but distant demeanor that felt unnatural and sad. Princess Charlotte, younger and more impulsive, struggled most with the new restrictions. Several times during the evening, she approached Camilla with the same affectionate openness she had always shown, only to be gently redirected by her parents toward other activities or other family members. The confusion in the child's eyes was heartbreaking to witness. Prince Louis, still very young, seemed least affected by the changed dynamics, but even he appeared to sense that something was different about the family atmosphere. His usual exuberant energy was more subdued, and he stayed closer to his parents than in previous years. The Christmas Eve dinner conversation was polite and carefully neutral, touching on safe topics like the children's school activities, upcoming royal engagements, and general observations about the holiday season. What was missing was the natural flow of family banter, the shared jokes and casual intimacy that had made previous Christmas celebrations feel genuinely warm and connected. Catherine was gracious throughout the evening, making sure Camilla was included in group conversations and never overtly excluding her from activities. But there was an underlying formality to her interactions that hadn't existed before, a sense that every exchange was being carefully managed rather than allowed to develop naturally. William maintained his respectful demeanor, but Camilla could sense his constant monitoring of the family dynamics. He seemed to be keeping careful track of every interaction between Camilla and his children, ready to intervene if conversations became too engaged or lasted too long. His vigilance created an atmosphere of subtle tension that affected everyone's ability to relax and enjoy the celebration. After the children were put to bed, the adults gathered in the drawing room for what had traditionally been one of the most enjoyable parts of Christmas Eve: relaxed conversation over drinks, sharing memories of the year past, and making plans for the year ahead. This year, the conversation felt stilted and artificial. Charles attempted to maintain the usual warm atmosphere, sharing amusing stories from his royal engagements and asking about everyone's plans for the new year. But the underlying tensions were impossible to ignore. Every topic of conversation seemed to have potential landmines, every shared memory risked highlighting how much had changed. When Catherine excused herself early, citing fatigue from the day's activities, William quickly followed, leaving Charles and Camilla alone in the drawing room much earlier than would have been normal in previous years. The early departure felt less like natural tiredness and more like a polite but clear indication that the evening's family time had reached its appropriate conclusion. "That was more difficult than I expected," Charles said quietly after they were alone, echoing his words from Charlotte's birthday months earlier. "The children are adapting to the new arrangements," Camilla replied diplomatically. "Though they still seem uncertain about what's expected of them. George asked me privately why you couldn't help him with his puzzle the way you did last year. I didn't know how to explain the new boundaries without making them seem arbitrary or unkind." "What did you tell him?" "I suggested that different years bring different traditions, and that perhaps this year he could ask Mama or Papa for help instead. But he's old enough to recognize that as an evasion rather than a real explanation." The conversation continued quietly for another hour, both of them processing the emotional complexity of navigating family relationships that had been fundamentally altered but never explicitly acknowledged or discussed. They were creating new patterns of interaction based on unspoken understandings and careful avoidances rather than honest communication about what had changed and why. Christmas morning brought the traditional gift opening, church service, and family lunch. Camilla participated in all the expected activities, maintaining the pleasant demeanor and gracious presence that years of royal training had taught her. But underneath the surface performance, she was acutely aware of how much her role in the family celebration had diminished. During lunch, Princess Charlotte made one more attempt to connect with her step-grandmother in the old, natural way. "Grandmama, can you sit next to me?" she asked, patting the chair beside her at the children's table. Before Camilla could respond, Catherine intervened smoothly. "Charlotte, darling, you know the seating arrangement is already set.
Perhaps after lunch you could show Grandmama the drawing you made yesterday, if she has time.
The conditional nature of the suggestion, if she has time, was a polite way of indicating that Camilla's availability to spend time with the children was no longer assumed but would need to be specifically arranged and limited in scope. After lunch, Camilla did indeed look at Charlotte's drawing, a colorful depiction of the family that included everyone in bright, happy poses. But even this brief interaction felt watched and managed, with Catherine nearby ensuring the conversation didn't extend beyond appropriate bounds. The most telling moment came during the traditional Christmas afternoon walk through the Sandringham estate. In previous years, the family would spread out naturally, with different combinations of people walking together, children running ahead or falling behind, and conversations flowing organically among various family members. This year, the walking arrangement was much more structured. William and Catherine walked with their children, maintaining their family unit as a distinct group. Charles and Camilla walked together, parallel to but separate from the Wales family unit. The physical arrangement mirrored the emotional boundaries that had been established: respectful distance, parallel paths, minimal intersection. During the walk, Prince George ran ahead and then back toward the adults several times, his natural energy and curiosity drawing him toward both his parents and his grandparents. But each time he approached Charles and Camilla, William would call him back or Catherine would redirect his attention to something else, maintaining the separation between the family units even during this most casual of family activities. The afternoon concluded with traditional Christmas tea, another opportunity for family togetherness that felt more formal and constrained than in previous years. Conversation was pleasant but surface level, avoiding any topics that might create the kind of natural bonding moments that had made previous Christmas celebrations feel genuinely warm and connected. As the day drew to a close and it became time to retire for the evening, Camilla realized that she had successfully navigated an entire Christmas celebration without creating any obvious conflicts or uncomfortable moments. But she had also participated in a family gathering where her relationships with the people she cared about most had been systematically minimized and carefully managed. That evening, as she and Charles prepared for bed in their familiar room at Sandringham, she reflected on what the day had taught her about her place in the family going forward. "I think I understand now what William and Catherine were trying to achieve," she said thoughtfully.
"What's that?"
"They wanted to demonstrate that family celebrations could be successful and harmonious with my role significantly reduced. They wanted to prove to themselves and to the children that they could create meaningful holiday traditions without depending on the broader family relationships that existed before."
"And do you think they succeeded?"
"In a way, yes. The day was pleasant and peaceful. There were no conflicts or uncomfortable moments. The children seemed happy, even if they were also somewhat confused about the new boundaries. But it felt like we were all performing roles in a play rather than simply being family together. Everything was so carefully managed and controlled that there was no room for the kind of spontaneous warmth and genuine connection that makes family celebrations truly special." Charles was quiet for a long moment before responding. "I keep hoping that these arrangements are truly temporary, that once William and Catherine feel more secure in their parenting choices, they'll be willing to allow relationships to develop more naturally again."
"Do you really believe that will happen?"
"I want to believe it. But I'm beginning to think that what we've witnessed over the past 6 months represents a permanent shift in how they want to structure their family relationships. They may genuinely prefer the control and predictability that comes with more formal, managed interactions." As they settled into bed, Camilla found herself thinking about the children and how they were being affected by all these changes. George's confusion about why family relationships had suddenly become so structured and limited. Charlotte's repeated attempts to connect in the old, natural way, only to be redirected and constrained. Louis's gradual adaptation to a family atmosphere that was more careful and less spontaneous than what he had known before. The children were learning, perhaps without realizing it, that family relationships could be turned on and off, that closeness could be managed and controlled rather than allowed to develop organically. They were learning that some people who had once been important parts of their lives could become peripheral figures whose involvement was optional rather than valued. These were complex lessons for young children, and Camilla wondered what long-term effects this careful management of family relationships might have on their understanding of love, loyalty, and connection.
But those were concerns for another day. Tonight, she simply had to accept that Christmas had been successfully celebrated under the new family dynamics, and that her role going forward would be significantly different from what it had been in the past. The most important realization was that she could survive and even find dignity in this diminished role, that she could maintain her own sense of worth and purpose even when family relationships didn't develop the way she had hoped. The experience had been painful but also clarifying, teaching her about resilience and the importance of finding fulfillment in relationships and activities where she was truly welcomed and valued. As sleep finally came, Camilla reflected that sometimes the greatest challenges weren't dramatic confrontations or obvious rejections, but the quiet erosion of possibilities and the gradual redefinition of relationships that had once seemed secure and promising. Learning to navigate those changes with grace and dignity was perhaps one of the most important skills anyone could develop, royal or otherwise. The morning would bring new adaptations and new ways of being family together, but tonight, she had successfully completed her first major family celebration under the new rules, and that was accomplishment enough.